In my head.
Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm going to give you tips on what your settings should be on a DSLR for video. So first of all, ISO is very important. You want to keep your ISO as low as you can. ISO, if over a certain limit, will have a massive amount of grain in the video and it won't look nearly as good. Now, to keep your ISO low, you want to keep in mind two other settings. Those are shutter speed and aperture. Now, aperture controls how much depth of field you have. Now, if your aperture number is higher or your aperture is more closed, you'll be able to get more things in focus. However, you'll have less depth of field and less bokeh. Now, the bokeh is what makes things look fuzzy if they're not in focus and can give a very cinematic and cool look. The lower the number on your aperture, so typically around a 4 or a 2.8 to a 4, will mean that you don't have to have your ISO as much, is because the aperture is wide open and it's going to let lots of light into the camera. The other setting that's important is your shutter speed. Now, your shutter speed should always be roughly double what your frames per second are. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 50. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second and you want more of that slow motion, then you should be at roughly 125. So those are the most important settings on a DSLR for shooting video. Now, if you want to shoot slow motion, you want to shoot at least 60 frames per second. This means you can slow your footage down to roughly 50%. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second and you try to slow your footage down, you're going to need to use a program like Twixtor to make it look smooth. And even then, people can usually kind of tell that it's been slowed down afterwards. It's definitely better to shoot in a higher frame rate if you want to slow your footage down. Now, sometimes if you're shooting in a bright environment, it can be really hard to get that shutter speed to be double what your frame rate is. So sometimes if you need to darken things, you can get a variable ND filter or some kind of filter to let less light in. Or you can raise your aperture number and that'll let less light into the camera, but you won't have as much depth of field. I hope those settings helped you better shoot video with a DSLR. I look forward to seeing your comments down below on any tips you have on settings for shooting video or any cool videos that you've shot.